weird,
Okay.
quirky, serious, whatever you want.
All right. So let's start from this first one. I actually know this guy is a good homie of mine, Marco D'Amico. He's at the Hockey Expert on Twitter. You have mentioned that your feeling is that Montreal will move on from Marc Bergevin. Have you heard anything on the subject of a potential replacement or any changes from the organization? You said you wanted these questions. Let's just get at it now. Let's get to what the people want to know, CJ.
Well, and I don't say this like glibly or anything. Marc Bergevin being in COVID protocol, I don't think anything's going to happen while that's going on. And
Right.
I read some of his comments. I hope he's doing well and that his health is in a good spot there. It sounded like he turned a corner after a tough couple of days, which is actually what I've heard from a few people I know anecdotally that have dealt with COVID who are double vaccinated. That essentially you have a day or two that it's rough, and then you come through it and you're happy you're vaccinated. So good for everyone who got vaccinated. But yes, okay. So I think it would be. For me, it would be a surprise at this point if he finishes out the season, just the way the season's gone. I don't get any sense at all that Marc Bergevin and the Montreal Canadiens are in any degree of dialogue on a contract. They obviously took a couple stabs at this, even going back to last summer and weren't able to find a deal. And so, I know it's hardly a surprise to say it's just a matter of when. And, with all the losing the team's done, I think that probably makes some sense to maybe do it sooner than later. And so we'll see how his COVID situation goes. What I have heard is that the organization seems pretty focused on a Francophone candidate to replace him. Again, not a huge shock, but every time you face, it's been almost 10 years, right, since they've had this kind of decision for that seat, maybe you want to view it differently. And so the Francophone candidates, frankly, aren't that plentiful. With Julian Brisebois locked up, the obvious candidates. I'm not saying there aren't lots of Francophones in a sport of hockey. It's just, it can be a big leap into the GM's chair of the Montreal Canadiens if you haven't had significant front office experience prior to getting there. And so, I think Matthew Darche is someone that makes some sense. I know there's lots of talk in the media about guys like Patrick Waugh or, other sort of legends of the organization. In Patrick's case, he did coach for a few years with Colorado, and he's run the junior team in Quebec City for a long time. But I'd be surprised if that's the kind of way they go. And so, I look at someone like a Matthew Darche as a likely successor or a possible successor. I don't want to call it likely. It's not that I know for sure he's going to get the job, but I think that he rates pretty highly for them. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're going right now is I do think it's more than likely there's a change made. It's going to be a Francophone, maybe not initially. I don't know if they do an interim type of GM as we've seen in Anaheim and Chicago. But I would say the next permanent GM of the Canadiens after Marc Bergevin will be Francophone.
What about Martin Matten Jr. in Anaheim? And that admittedly was not a name I had thought about until, until like fairly recently, just mentioning it to friends and other media colleagues. He's a guy who's from Quebec City, has been in the Anaheim organization for a little while now. I think was like a scout at one point as well. Like, why hasn't his name been brought up compared to Mathieu Darche, who his name gets thrown out a lot? Patrick Waugh, even his name getting mentioned. How come no Martin Matten mentioned?
I actually hear a lot of buzz about Madden. Maybe it's just people talking in the circles I'm talking. Like, I'm not saying that's on social media or in the media, but I do think I think he would be someone that they would look at. I think with Matthew Darche, like, let's call it as it is. He's been Julian Brisebois' right-hand man the last 2 years. He's won 2 Stanley Cups as a result. Really well-known person in the marketplace. Really well-respected person, and he's learning at the hands or beside, probably the best GM in the league or one of the best GMs in the league, depending on how you rate these things. And so I think that qualifies him in the sense that, like, he's seeing how the best organization in the league is running. Why wouldn't you, again, when you're dealing with a relatively limited pool of people with that kind of level of experience, I think that's why you're hearing a lot about Matthew Darche. As for Madden, I don't know him personally. I've read a little bit about his past and sort of have some idea of his way through pro hockey. But I will say there are people in his corner. Like, I've had actually a couple people reach out to me independent of me asking around, sort of putting his name on the radar, saying you should look at this guy, and so, I do think he's someone that would get a look, because again, there's just not a lot of francophones working in other organizations that have at least got close enough to the GM seat that you could say, all right, he's ready to take that leap, which is, where Marc Bergevin was, right? He was with the Blackhawks during their early cup year in 2010 and working in their front office before he made the jump. And, I know there's been a lot of ups and downs, and this year certainly hasn't gone well in Montreal, but, I think it's been a relatively successful tenure for him. I just sort of feel like it's maybe exhausted. It's, it's hard to keep reinventing yourself forever. I think maybe there's a new set of eyes needed for that organization.
Last thing I'll mention with regards to hockey in Quebec, did you hear anything about our Quebec Premier Francois Legault basically putting together a committee of some of the, I guess, brighter minds when it comes to hockey in our province in order to try to figure out a way why there aren't more Quebecois players who are playing in hockey? Now that you keep reiterating the fact that there aren't that many candidates from a front office perspective, I wonder if they should even consider the idea that, hey, maybe they should find ways to get more of those people in the front office level. Because you're right, the pool for prospective GM candidates for the Canadiens, for example, not going to be as plentiful as opposed to if they widened up their search.
Yeah, I saw the Premier's, comments on that, and I can't say I like the idea. It's not a Quebec issue. Like, frankly, I think this is a bit of a Canada issue when you just look at, getting, onboarding people into the sport. There's obviously a lot of financial challenges with it. Mm-hmm. Ice doesn't appear naturally everywhere anymore. So it's got to be refrigerated in a closed building, and there's a lot of costs associated with that. And let's face it, there's other things to do. Things change and grow and over time. And so, I think that it's something I know Hockey Canada has been focused on at its level, participation rates, trying to introduce people to the sport that maybe don't have the means to do it in their families. But, the idea you try to capture all the best athletes you can and get them in this sport. I like it. I do think we're getting closer and closer to an election there. So I see he's also making some noise about bringing the Nordiques back, which I'm not saying won't happen, but to me, that's that conversation starting in Quebec versus in the NHL's head office, if you know what I'm saying. Like, they've got a beautiful arena there. I've been to Quebec City. I was there at the World Championships back in 2008 for a hockey event, and it was the old Pepsi Colisée at the time, but like, it was awesome. So I'm certainly on board with Quebec getting a team. Like, I think it would be great, but I just don't get the feeling that's imminent or close or anything like that.
Okay. Well, you kind of touched into one other question that was asked by Max Ellis 26 on Twitter. What are the chances of Quebec City getting the Nordiques back, either via relocation or expansion, in the next 10 years? You kind of touched off on that.
10 years, like, if we're taking a 10-year time frame, I think that's possible.
Yeah.
If we're taking a 2-year time frame, I don't think it's likely. I know we spoke a little bit about Arizona in the last pod, Julian, but if Arizona stays in Arizona, which is still a question, but like, I do believe that they have a pretty solid sounding plan to try to do that. And certainly that's their 100% intention as an organization. I'm not sure who we're putting on the list of teams that would be relocated. And, we've just added the 32nd team. Even that process took 4 or 5 years. I can't see the league going to 33 and 34 too quickly, or 36 or whatever it might be, maybe eventually. Unfortunately, because I know there's people that want to see it and they do have a great venue. Timing is everything with this kind of decision. And I don't think the timing's coming together to see that happen anytime, in the immediate future.